next up, we have our main keynote presentation from Allan Badiner, the author of Zigzag Zen, Buddhism and Psychedelics. Allan is a longtime meditator and has studied with Thich Nhat Hanh as one of the kind of preeminent Buddhist priests, who is currently I think coming towards the end of his life, and is a very influential person in the field of Buddhism, and is definitely, I don't know him personally, but whenever I see pictures of him, he looks really kind and nice, and so far that's been my experience of Allan as well. So I'd like to welcome Allan to the stage, and he'll be talking about
Thanks. Can I shut this? No? Trying not to hunch over while I speak, so let me see if I can liberate this. Does this work okay? Great. So I just want to say thank you, Nikki, for that terrific presentation and meditations, and also for coming out, psychedelically speaking. I think that's it's really important to do that, to convey to those around you and those who know you and trust you that you can take psychedelics and be a real and genuine and productive person, and not just escaping and having trivial kinds of entertainment. I also want to thank Jeff Bausimer for making this possible, and all the people who made it possible.
Let me just
Sure.
switch the screen real quick.
Including the volunteers, like myself. So it's nice to be speaking at the new school. My daughter actually attends school here. I live in California, and I'm staying in Herald Square, and of course, right after I checked in, I heard about the threat that ISIS was making directed right at Herald Square. So that was only, mildly disconcerting. But on the way over here, I was ruminating about the distinction between Eastern and Western, East and West, and realizing they don't really hold up. They're kind of empty. For example, in the discipline that I've been studying for 30 years or so, which doesn't mean I know anything, I don't. But in the discipline of Buddhism, we probably wouldn't have Buddhism were it not for the West rediscovering it in the East. In the 1800s, in the late 1800s, we had archaeologists and professors and historians descending on India and sweeping away at piles of bricks and cataloging things and coming up with a whole story and uncovering what was once a major phenomena in India that was lost from the 11th century on. And so, and the same thing happened in Sri Lanka, where the Secretary of State under Abraham Lincoln, Colonel Olcott, and his colorful partner went to Sri Lanka and started opening up classes and schools for young children to learn about Buddhism and learn about their heritage, and it made a full recovery. It was almost wiped out. So East, and I'm glad this conference is celebrating not just East or West, but really both, the interdependence of both East and West. So I'd like to talk a little bit about my path to Buddhism, and how Buddhism was my gateway drug to psychedelics. You heard that right. And also the birth of the book Zigzag Zen, and why I think this conversation is so urgent at this time, that at least we discuss this and look at psychedelics for what is possible, for whether it's a useful tool or not. So when I was growing up, as they say, I'm still growing up, and I was pretty seriously clean edge. I mean, I was an anti-war protester, very active with SDS. I was not interested in taking any kind of drugs. I didn't even drink coffee. I didn't smoke cigarettes. I didn't smoke pot. I didn't drink any alcohol. It was not like a serious thing for me. I just didn't feel the inclination, didn't feel the desire. And I remained that way into my 30s. So around 30 years old, I took some time off from work and decided that I needed to travel.
Put these up.
Yeah, I can take the book away. Excuse me one moment.
Just, yeah.
Thank you. So, I ended up spending a year in India, and it was an amazing year of my life. I had read a book by Paul Brunton, who was a hard-nosed English journalist who worked at the London Times, and it was his intention in the 30s that he was going to go to India and reveal that all of this Indian spirituality was a lot of bunk, and that all of these tricks that they did were just that, tricks and fakes. And so he was determined to bust that open for once and for all. And so he came to India and he started going to all the ashrams and meeting with all the gurus. I think this was in the mid-30s. And he was blown away. He did not expect to encounter what he encountered. And so he wrote a very different kind of book, and it was called My Search in Secret India. So I read that book and I was very, very inspired by it. And I thought, gee, maybe I'll write an updated version. So I started going to all the ashrams and meeting with all the gurus and practicing whatever they were offering to learn. And it was a fascinating experience because I would take little bits and pieces from all the different places I went, and I felt that it really made a difference in my life. And then it was about time to go back. It was almost a year. And a friend of mine said, you're not ready to go back. You're not gonna fit in. She was talking to me at that point. I had Indian clothes on, I had a shaved head, I had a tilak here, I wanted to do some bhakti, I wanted to do some dancing and chanting. And she said, you've changed a lot. Now what you need to do is integrate. You need to go someplace and just calm yourself down and really kind of let this stuff filter in deeply so that you can resume your more acceptable and expected role in Western life, in Western society. So I thought that was good advice, and I went to Sri Lanka. She actually picked out a place that I should go. It was called Rock Hill Hermitage. It was an ancient Buddhist monastery in the hills outside Kandy in Sri Lanka. Kandy's the biggest town, or the second biggest town. And so I made my way there, and they showed me this little room. To say room was be generous. And I was ready to start this experience. It was awful. The room was dirty. There were bugs. It was hot. Breakfast was stewed greens at 6:30 in the morning, and the same stewed greens at 11:30 for lunch, and no dinner. My bones were starting to hurt from sitting. Every bone in my body was complaining. My neck hurt, my waist hurt, my butt hurt, everything hurt. And it got worse. And I thought, I'm getting out of here. This is not working for me. And I talked to the guy in charge, and he said, well, we can order a car for you, but it'll be 2 or 3 days before we can get a car up here. And so I thought, all right, maybe it'll get better. It didn't, it got worse. And so I was patient about it, and pretty soon it was pretty close to the end. And I thought, well, I might as well just sit it out, so to speak. And so I did. And then about a day and a half, just really less than 2 days before it was over and before the car was coming, which I thought about constantly, the car is coming, everything changed. I mean everything. All the pain just fell away as if it was never there. And I found myself in a quiet state of ecstasy. And I just felt so connected to everything around me and everyone around me, including the bugs. I mean, the trees, everything, all life. I was part of it, it was part of me, and I felt it viscerally. It was really an extraordinary experience. And it was also accompanied by this total sense of relaxation. And I guess I can't think of a better word than just a state of love, just to be in a state of love. And I noticed, or it's one thing to feel these things, it's another to observe evidence of it from other people. People would come up to me and start talking to me and engaging me. And I was never that type of person. I did not put out the vibe, come and talk to me. I'm not an antisocial person, but I'm kind of a loner. And if I have nothing to say, I'm not going to say anything. So anyway, it was really kind of remarkable the way that my state was reflected in the people around me and interacting with me. So I knew I was onto something. And then it was time to go back. And so I got a job at the LA Weekly. My desire was to reinvent myself as a writer, which I always enjoyed doing. And before long, I had a column called Mind and Spirit. And it was a lot of fun because my beat was the spiritual beat, the metaphysical beat, the consciousness beat. And this was just happening, in the 80s, and it was exciting time in Los Angeles. So my beat covered everything from Scientology to psychoneuroimmunology, Terence McKenna to Thich Nhat Hanh. And in the process of doing that column, I got to know a lot of these characters. So anyway, I went to a party. A friend of mine invited me to a party. Her father was a well-known psychiatrist. And they lived in a beautiful house overlooking LA. And I was admiring the view. And then she came up to me and she said, come here, follow me. I said, sure. So then she said, let's go in the bathroom. I said, oh, this is going to be fun. And so I went into the bathroom, and she closed the door, and she said, close your eyes and stick out your tongue. And I did exactly what I was told. And then she slapped some powder on my tongue and then pushed me out the door and said, go have a good time. And I thought, whoa, I trusted her, I knew her, and I didn't think she knows that I was not psychedelically inclined, so I thought I'm not going to worry about it. So I resumed my position looking at the view outside and just admiring the lights, and then I noticed that there was a woman standing next to me about 20 feet to my right, and a little voice would, get out of there, you don't like her, and I knew her, and I did find her voice irritating, and I didn't like the things she had to say before, so I did start to move away, but instead of moving away, I moved toward her. And this voice was like, what are you doing? I told you to get away. And so I started talking to her, and I thought, gee, she's really fantastic. I like the sound of her voice. She's really interesting. I'm really enjoying talking to her. So we talked for like 20 minutes. I didn't offer to marry her, which sometimes that can happen. So I don't think I have to go too far to that what was laid on my tongue, right? So I think at the time it was called Adam. Then it became MDMA, its scientific term. And then it became ecstasy. And then now it's become Molly. And God knows what it'll be next year. I don't know. But that's what it was. And so that was interesting because I touched that state that I had. I'll call it the state of Sri Lanka. It touched that state where I felt connected to everything and caring about everything and everything inside of me and me inside of everything else. So it didn't reproduce it the way I experienced it in Sri Lanka, but it touched it. It reminded me of it. And so I was very intrigued now with looking at the path of psychedelics alongside of Buddhism. And at the time I was studying Buddhism. I was studying for a master's. I was studying Pali with a Sri Lankan monk. I was eating lots of greens. And I was trying to do everything I could to bring back that state unsuccessfully. I mean, I had a lot of pleasure that came from it, a peace of mind. It was definitely very grounding, but it didn't give me that sense of total connection, that sort of altered state that I experienced in Sri Lanka. So I wanted to know more about this material called Adam. So I found out that it was both discovered and created by Alexander Shulgin, a chemist, Went to see him in San Francisco. He had a little cramped office in San Francisco General Hospital. I came in, I thought he was like one of those gurus that I'd met in India. He had bright white hair and it shot out of his head like a rocket. And he had this beatific smile. And his energy was just so sweet and so welcoming and so real. And we talked a little bit, and I got to know his wife, and used to go up to the Bay Area sometimes for their Friday night dinners. And I was really becoming a part of a psychedelic community. And I really admired these people. They were sincere, they were real explorers. At the same time, they were very sensitive and very caring. And so I really enjoyed them. And then I met Terence McKenna. So it started with an interview with him for the LA Weekly. And then we became friends, and he told me about psilocybin. And so psilocybin and I became friends. And that was interesting because that also touched that state of that experience from Sri Lanka. It sort of recreated it to some extent in a different way. It was interesting. I was getting pieces of that experience from different psychedelics. So I had quite a love affair with psilocybin. And then he said, now you have to try yahe. Ya what? And it turns out that's ayahuasca. But at that time, nobody knew what ayahuasca was. I mean, it was not well known. There wasn't one book about it, except maybe, I think, Allen Ginsberg writing William Burroughs. It was called the Yahe Letters. But there was nothing available in print to research about it. I had to take Terence's word, and that was tricky. So, so also Terence had a very odd way of being with psychedelics. You know, alone, the middle of the night, no interlocking arms with your friends for support, no ayahuasqueros to sing the songs to soothe your transitions, just out there facing your demon. And in fact, that's what it was. It was a 2.5-hour grueling shamanic death journey, and I was basically holding my dead body the whole time. And I mean, there was crazy shit going on. I mean, a fire-breathing dragon. I mean, I could have been more original, but it was like unbelievably terrifying. So after that, after I sort of came out of that slowly, I struggled up the hill through the bushes in the jungle. This was in Hawaii. And I arrived at his kitchen door, and he was sitting there stirring at a big pot like a witch. And he said, "Oh, back already?" I said, "Why did you do that to me? How could you have given me that stuff? You knew what was going to happen. Why did you do that?" He said, "Oh, well, are you going to do it again?" I said, "Again? Are you kidding me?" And I started laughing hysterically. The thought of voluntarily doing that again seemed preposterous. And I said, "Well, why? That which doesn't kill you makes you stronger?" And he said, "No, that which kills you makes you stronger." So, I mean, okay, Terence, I let that one go. That was the only time I took it, and I'm not sure I'll ever take it again. But it's still with me. It's still with me. I mean, behind a very flimsy curtain, that experience is still there. And so my relationship to death remains very different. I don't want to die, but I'm not afraid of it. And I look forward to it sometimes. I think to myself, wow, it's going to be a nice rest with no alarm clock, you know? And I'm not looking forward to death, don't misunderstand me. But the fear is almost gone. I still have a little, but it is a very different relationship with life and death. And very, very meaningful indeed. So I started to see that there was a real strong parallel between Buddhism and psychedelics. And I started to I thought, you know, this is something that maybe I should explore in a book, because there hadn't been anything about this topic of the two together. So I went to speak to Jack Kornfield, who's a very successful and respected meditation teacher in California at Spirit Rock. And I talked to him. Actually, I went to a one-day retreat, and it wasn't just a personal conversation. He was answering someone's question in a Q&A, and they asked, "Have you ever taken psychedelics?" And he said, "Not only have I taken psychedelics, but I give psychedelics credit for training my mind to be open to a very against-the-grain kind of teaching that Buddhism is." And so I was prepared to really fully understand and practice Buddhism after I took LSD. I thought, wow, that's powerful. And you know, I took that in real deeply, and I talked to Jack about my intention of maybe doing a book, and and I talked to other teachers, all the well-known teachers that I could find who were Western born, asked them about their psychedelic history. Interesting, every single one of them had a psychedelic phase before they became Buddhist teachers. All of them, even the most pious ones. And actually there was one, Brother David Steindl-Rast said that, there was one that said she didn't, and he said she was fibbing, she did. So actually, I can say all of them had that prior experience. And also, you know, I made note of the fact that the same teachers who were coming into the culture talking to us about psychedelics were also talking about Buddhism, whether it be Ram Dass or Alan Watts or Allen Ginsberg or Jack Kerouac, and there are others as well. So that was very strong as well. So I thought, this is it, I'm going to do this book. And then Alex Gray came aboard with a beautiful idea of bringing some beautiful visuals to the book, representing various states of consciousness. 30 different artists from Francesco Clemente to Amanda Sage to Android Jones and quite a few artists in between. And so that I will be forever grateful to Alex for that. In fact, I'm going up to Cosm. How many have heard of Cosm? Great. Cosm is the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. It's about a 2-hour drive from Manhattan. And there's going to be a Zigzag Zen night tomorrow night up there from 7 to 10, in case you feel like driving up there. I haven't been up there. I haven't been up there yet, so I'm very excited about that. So it's clear that we're living at a time when there's increasing interest in shamanism and the shamanic tools, psychedelics being the primary tool in the chest for that, and also combined with some sense of ethics, some system of ethics, preferably a time-tested one, like Buddhism, but also Sufism or Taoism or various other disciplines that have a spiritual practice and a sense of ethics, which I think is a really nice combination with psychedelics. In fact, parapsychologist Stanley Krippner points out that while psychedelic substances have been used wisely in many primitive cultures for spiritual and healing purposes, our culture doesn't have this framework. We don't have this closeness to God, this closeness to nature, or the shamanistic outlook. Krippner says we've lost all that. This is probably where Buddhism comes in, with an ethic of compassion and time-tested teachings that promote awareness, kindness, and self-development. So psychedelic exploration and Buddhist practice share a common concern, which is primacy of the mind. Both in Buddhism and psychedelic experiences, there is a great importance on coming to terms with one's own morality and impermanence, on comprehending reality directly as opposed to abstractly or theoretically, and an understanding of the tenuous borders between oneself and others, and oneself and the world. Nobel laureate chemist Paul Crutzen popularized the term Anthropocene to describe the new geological epoch that the Earth has moved into since the stability of the planetary system, or the Holocene, was disrupted by human industrial activity, mainly the burning of fossil fuels for energy. To that point now, it's dominating the evolutionary path of the planet. This is pretty much understood and agreed on by all scientists, except for the in-house Fox scientists and the some Republicans. But this is, I don't have to talk about what's going on with the Earth. We all know about that. But these, so Professor Stephan of Australian University says when humans look back, the Anthropocene will probably represent one of the 6 biggest extinctions in the history of the planet. By the way, when people say, I'm working to save the Earth, or we have to save the Earth, we're not saving the Earth. It's important to make that distinction. The Earth is going to be just fine. It's going to survive no problem at all. It's human beings and human life and animal life and all forms of life. That's what's at peril. So what we're doing is we're changing the life support systems of the planet. In fact, we're destroying them. So in that case, we want to save ourselves. We want to save those life support systems, not the planet itself, which is doing just fine. So while we're in this midst of what is essentially a slow motion ecological collapse, people still are in pursuit of self-fulfillment, of seeking deeper spiritual truths, and learning about strategies for liberating themselves from suffering. Bound to be encountered on any journey of that kind is Buddhism and psychedelics. Many of the very plants and chemicals like LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, cannabis, certain cactuses that were banned for the past 50 years are now being studied finally. Among the most promising, they are considered among the most promising inventions or interventions in a variety of difficult and medical and mental conditions. For example, in 2014, the late Richard Rockefeller, MD, he was a doctor, speaking at Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, and I was there, very moved by what he had to say, reported in a very understated way the central finding of studies he was involved with, that MDMA had come closer than anything else, even remotely, to actually curing intractable PTSD. Psilocybin, or magic mushrooms, are now known as much for the enduring improvement of the user's outlook on life as they are by vivid visuals and hallucinations. In one recent study, psilocybin dramatically and sustainably reduced the existential end-of-life anxiety in dying cancer patients. Could psychedelics become regarded as a cultural and ecological imperative for our survival? It is fair to ask, what else can offer the kind of mental evolution and change in political and social perspectives with the rapidity required by our degenerating ecosystem? It's a question that we should ask and think about. No argument, we're witnessing a greater acknowledgement of psychedelic use in a spiritual context. There's a flowering of books and magazine articles evidencing a sharp rise in intellectual interest. All of this is tantamount to a revolution in our understanding of the mind itself and in the ways that our psychedelic interventions may result in an evolutionary mental advancement. Ralph Metzner, PhD, one of the Harvard triumvirate with Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, he was the quiet one, the one that didn't get a lot of publicity, but he was right there involved throughout their programs and activities. He suggested LSD was nothing less than a turning point in human evolution. Metzner asserted that Dr. Hoffman's discovery of LSD shortly after the first nuclear bomb was not a coincidence. He looked to LSD as a kind of divine antidote to the nuclear curse, and that humanity must pay heed to the psychedelic revelation if it is to alter its self-destructive course and avert a major catastrophe. Psychedelics can offer some needed insights into our relationship with the planet, that we come from the earth, that we are sustained by the earth, and that we return to the earth. Following psychedelic experiences, people often report a discernible wave of gratitude that accompanies the favorable sensations induced by a particular psychedelic. This greater understanding of our interbeing with the planet can only contribute to the potentially positive outcomes in terms of the ability of the planet to sustain an ecosystem that makes life possible. An important side effect of these journeys appears to be an emergent awareness of one's immediate environment and attendant beings being sacred and inviolate. In the late 80s, once MDMA's empathogenic effects became more widely known, it was often joked that the most effective thing that environmental and social activists could do is put it in the water supply. Can we reasonably expect yoga and meditation alone to be utilized at the level needed for immediate evolutionary change? That's a question, not a statement. But this only raises the question of a possible role that psychedelics have in the maturation of deep ecological intelligence and a sense of kinship with all life. It is arguable that our only hope for surviving man-made perils ahead is a rapid and thorough awakening of consciousness. The Bodhisattva path may become the new archetype for psychedelically driven planetary activism. It is in this context that Robert Thurman, the first American to be ordained by the Dalai Lama, and who has never been a psychedelic enthusiast, came to Burning Man and told a crowd of 300 in 2014 that when one considers the magnitude of the challenges ahead, psychedelics that can rapidly develop our empathic capacity and degree of gratefulness could be considered a skillful means, provided they were used carefully. The fifth precept, Thurman added, was clearly referring to alcohol. In the Pali, it actually refers to the word for alcohol, which was, even in ancient times, a huge social and health problem. A new scientific study, published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology, looked at 190,000 respondents from 2008 to 2012 and found that the classic psychedelics were not associated with adverse mental health outcomes. In addition, it found that people who had used LSD and psilocybin had lower lifetime rates of suicidal inclinations. Along with the recognition that some psychedelics may be a medicine, not only for our bodies, our minds, and the spirit, but also for the health of the planet, they should nevertheless be approached with wisdom and caution, and with careful attention to set and setting. It is becoming a less radical idea all the time that what is good for the person is good for the planet. The understanding of the potential benefits of psychedelics appear to pass Schopenhauer's test for truth. At first it was ridiculed, then it was violently opposed, and now it is becoming accepted as self-evident. On the other hand, as Houston Smith likes to point out, while psychedelic use is all about altered states, Buddhism is all about altered traits, and one does not necessarily lead to the other. When Ralph Metzner, a psychedelic enthusiast if there ever was one, was asked by an interviewer if he thought that society had changed as a result of psychedelic use, he replied, "It's really impossible to say. I believe the important thing is not drugs per se, but the notion and practice of expanding consciousness and taking many more perspectives into account in all situations is key. After all," he added, "Charles Manson used LSD, and look what he did with it. What good was that?" Psychedelics and Buddhist practice may have a significant relationship, but I personally believe that no psychedelic experience can take the place of sustained and disciplined meditation and ethical practice. Examining psychedelics and Dharma teachings together, we may understand more deeply the essence of each. MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, is working on a protocol that would investigate the use of psychedelics in the midst of a 7 to 10-day Zen meditation retreat. This study would be conducted by Dr. Franz Vollenweider, professor of psychiatry in the School of Medicine at the University of Zurich, and a director at the Hefter Institute. MAPS and Hefter Institute right now are the two focused groups developing protocols and studies and actually meeting with success, finding approvals from the government and getting funding for it. MAPS, in fact, wants to emerge as the first nonprofit public pharmaceutical company. Perhaps our salvation, both in the East and the West, is recognizing that in the Anthropocene, humans must own their own power and work collaboratively and responsibly for changing the self-destructive behavior that is threatening all life. So with that, I'd like to open this up to some questions. I'll pretend I have answers, and you can pretend you have questions, and we can see what comes up. Yeah.
Will you continue to practice meditation after your experience in Sri Lanka?
Yes, yes, and I still struggle with getting that same powerful result. I was told at one point it was something called a stream entrance, but what I do, it really helps me. I don't really have these grand ambitions for meditation anymore. I can recognize the benefits every day. And so before I get out of bed, I stuff a pillow under me, and I just sit there for 15 minutes following my breath. noticing if it's coming in or going out. It's as simple as that. And then I face the day with much more strength, much more inner strength and peace. Yes?
When you do your practice of meditation, do you learn also to use the self-cleaning, or you do the cleaning with a group once like a week or once every 2 weeks? Because I practice a different type of meditation than yoga, which is called Marg, which is very helpful and it carried me to similar states that the anterior doctor was mentioning,
Mm-hmm.
which I found very puzzling to me because I never could have the answer directly by my guru, who the person was training me.
Mm-hmm.
Abandoned the practice, I realized I went back again to my anterior state, of anxiety and all problems that come up with the daily life. I went back again to try to see if that was really efficient because I am a trained physician, and I practiced for quite a while. But then I realized that no, the meditation did change the mind of mine,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a truly effective way of becoming in peace with myself and loving and being able to be approached by many people, as you mentioned now.
Of course. So, but your
That
question,
practice, the people, to be able to carry on the meditation to a higher levels, I was told that you need to cleanse.
to cleanse,
To cleanse, because every once
To
in a
cl-
while you
to
carry
clean?
on, yes, like a big weight that you're trying to get lifted from yourself.
uh-huh.
In order to reach those stages that you're mentioning that you were not feeling anymore, you have to do that, and it has to be in a constant practice.
Okay, so you're talking about
It's
the
advanced beyond,
the
what you were doing before. So
the effort made to
yes.
clean yourself before you engage in the meditation to enhance the effects that the meditation can offer you. I'm still not sure what you mean by clean, because when I had my most powerful experience of meditation, the very first meditation retreat I went to in Sri Lanka, I was anything but clean.
No, I mean cleanse.
I know,
Cleanse
inside you mean.
inside, yes.
So,
Cleanse all that baggage that comes out when you're meditating.
okay.
Meditating, you bring
So that's part of my process of meditation, I think, in focusing my mind. I'm letting go of stuff that I've been holding on to. It just goes away by itself, effortlessly. So I see the cleansing happen in the meditation itself. So I'm not sure what you meant by preparing for the meditation by cleaning.
after a while.
Okay,
After a while, it becomes like a flat state in which you don't advance anymore.
I see.
So in order to reach those stages that are more elevated, you have to do the process of doing the meditation with a group, which is more powerful.
With a group,
With a
yes.
group. And
Yes.
also by using your guru, as to interact directly with him to carry on this stronger thing.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes.
I noticed your bio said that you're part of Rainforest Action Network. Could
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, so along with Buddhism and psychedelics meeting, ecological awareness was also part of that shift in my perspective on life. And so it was clear to me that in the sense of everything being part of me and me being part of everything else, that I had a very important obligation to work for preserving the natural systems of the earth. And I took great delight in being in nature, as Nikki was talking about. It was not just being in nature, it was being. That was being for me, to be reflected by life all around me and feeling it, and I was sure that it was feeling me too. So I had an opportunity at the Weekly to write about rainforest destruction, and it became the cover story. And it was a big picture of Burger King and this obese person with a bib eating what looked like a miniature rainforest. And so I got a call from Rainforest Action Network saying, hey, that article was great, and it generated all these letters, and like about 30,000 letters came into Burger King, and they canceled a beef contract in Costa Rica because of your article. I said, oh my God, that's great. So they invited me to come up and meet them all, and eventually I joined the board, and I've been on the board now for 25 years. So, thanks. Yes?
With the destruction of rainforest, there's also destruction of indigenous communities that have held these shamanic practices since the beginning of mankind. So where does cultural appropriation come in?
Mhm.
Happening? I mean, that's a big issue.
That's a huge issue, and I'm really proud to say the Rainforest Action Network is not looking to preserve rainforests, but the entire ecosystem, which includes the people that have lived in those areas, both in the past and in the present, and hopefully in the future. So one of the things that we do when we fundraise is a certain percentage, and you can also donate directly into it. We have a fund that goes directly to activists on the ground. So that, I think that's really important. We're unique in that sense that other environmental organizations have kind of a colonial orientation to this. You know, like we're gonna save your land. Well, never mind you. You're not a part of it. And we see that very differently. We see the rainforest itself, including the human residents of the rainforest. So thanks for bringing that up. That's a very important point. Yeah.
So the situations that you described of like oneness and ecstasy seem like fairly appealing, right?
Minimally so.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, with those kind of reports out there as being potential results of a serious meditation practice or even psychedelic use and other things we were describing, what are like the obstacles to more widespread acceptance of those practices or substances?
Huh. So he's asking if meditation and psychedelics can bring about such an exalted state of ecstasy and great feeling good, et cetera. Why does it seem like there's such an impediment or a barrier to wider acceptance of that and wider use? Is that about it? I don't know. I really don't. I mean, in my life, it wasn't the case. I overcame those impediments. I was very different as a young man than I am now. I mean, I was focused on political stuff and, not really focused on nature. And I had a personal revolution that was facilitated by both sitting in meditation and psychedelics. So, I mean, I think it's a great formula. So what am I going to do to try to help other people with those impediments? So I did a book. It's called Zigzag Zen, and it's about the path of Buddhism and psychedelics. And it wasn't just, we've got to sit and take drugs. It was also an opportunity for people who did not think that Buddhism and psychedelics were a good mixture to also have, their space to say that, so that you could go through and really look at the picture from a holistic way and get the sense of different ideas about it, so that you could come to terms with your own thoughts about it and have an informed opinion. So I think it boils down to the question has to turn around and it has to say, what are you doing to overcome that impediment? Because not only is it great to be experiencing those benefits of greater wisdom, greater happiness, greater stability, but also the planet needs that. And so it's an urgent need of a social nature as well. So yeah, that has to be the question. What are we going to do to overcome those impediments? Yes?
I think you talked about ethics as one impediment, and I'd love to hear what you have to say more about that, about the ethical piece.
So you want to know more about the role that ethical behavior or ethics themselves are part of?
That question.
Okay. That's very interesting. So yeah, in my opinion, not in my opinion, I mean, it's an intrinsic part of Buddhism. In fact, it is Buddhism. Buddhism is an ethical practice. It's a system of ethics. And in some cases you practice them, and in some cases you embody them even more deeply. So, and I think for me, it's really valuable it's not essential, because there's a lot of people that use psychedelics for their spiritual growth and have successful experiences, but they don't have a particular ethical system that they're employing along with it. Maybe they have their own sense of personal ethics, but they're not, adopting Buddhism or Taoism or something else. For me, I needed structure. I needed something to, also it was the thing that brought me to that great state of joy. So I was definitely on board with it. and still am. So, you know, I think it's really key, and I think your experience is deeper and more sustainable when it also includes an ethical system that both reflects and contributes to a greater sense of consciousness, if that makes any sense. I hope so. Yes?
I have a question. Would you agree that our emotional state, in particular emotional shame and guilt, can actually influence and make people more vulnerable in this psychedelic experience, including meditation and all that? Because if you look at it in all religious practices, there are prayers, right? It's a repetitive sort of exercise and, you know, like words that put us in the same kind of spiritual, you know, condition, like meditation, right? But our like the outcome depends really on the guidance that we have throughout this experience. So if you had, you know, your guides were really positive people, you know, shamans and or like they really tried, like they nurtured you and they tried to teach you how to love yourself, then if we look into other religions like Islam, for instance, a beautiful tradition, but then when like religious leaders, they kind of impose shame and guilt on people, and that's why from prayers they are coming out, you know, even more stressed. So if we look at the Middle East, let's say, and Islam or even Christianity, when people after praise can, you know, experience anxiety as well and have a bad experience.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that psychedelics, you know, a lot of people have bad experience. So if they enter this experience with bad guidance that will promote feeling of shame and guilt, then this experience can be actually very harmful for people. So my question is, if all of us will try to sort of explore meditation and psychedelics and, you know, in search for our inner selves, what is the guarantee that we're going to find the right guide?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I understand your question. So you're asking about the role of guides and about having some guidance and the importance of that so that you don't end up with a dangerous situation. Is that about right? Okay. Well, I'm not sure. I only partially buy into that idea. My own experience was different. I wouldn't call Terence McKenna a guide. You know, he poured my cup, and he led me down the trail and said, "Have a good time." The experience in Sri Lanka was spontaneous. The monk basically didn't even give Dharma talks. He was just there sitting at his desk the whole time that I was there. I saw him at lunch and breakfast sometimes when I bothered to get up. So, I mean, I don't use myself as a universal example, but that's my personal experience. And so it was tremendously helpful for me. Now, I agree with you for other people who have issues, or even if they don't, some people need that extra container or guidance to make the most of that experience. And I think that if hopefully they recognize that about themselves, then they seek that out. There are people who do that. So I think that there's an inner wisdom about your own trajectory that you have to pay attention to. If you're going to have success with it, you've got to start with that. And that should guide you. You know, there are people who seek out someone to work with, to guide them, and that impulse is part of their own liberation. So I think that's really what we can count on, ultimately, is ourselves. So, yes?
So, sort of now, this moment in time is kind of similar to like the 50s or 60s in terms of the sort of surge of research around psychedelics. Could you sort of compare, and then we had the Controlled Substances Act and everything, all the research was shut down. Could you compare that climate to this climate and talk about what you think the prospects are for this not going back into the fear phase again, if anything's different? How you see it?
Well, that's an interesting question. The question is, we had tremendous repression and resistance to using these psychedelics and in the 50s, and there was tremendous resistance to that. And
Like amazing, successful studies happening even then. It's not.
even then, exactly. Even the government was, different branches of the government was doing very important psychedelic research.
Yeah.
Stan Groff was working at the Maryland State Hospital, working with patients using LSD. And that was a government-funded, government-run program, which was cut down along with all the other similar kinds of programs when the craze against drugs got into full force. I think a lot of it was political. We had, there was prohibition. There was a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington who were sort of like, losing their staff and their budgets, and they had to dream up something, some ominous quality about all this to attract more money and more power, and so they could hire more agents and have, that's definitely been the cannabis story with Harry Anslinger at what was the precursor of the FBI, the FBN, and he made up this unbelievable story about how it would make you insane and would make white women want to have intercourse with black men. He actually put this out there. This was not hinted at. He actually said that, and it was in the literature, and this kind of crazy stuff. And he called it marijuana because he didn't want people to feel comfortable with, they were already comfortable with the word cannabis. They were wearing clothes made of hemp. They were writing on hemp paper. They were going to the drugstore and buying oil of cannabis for medicinally, okay, which was available from 1920 something or 1918 all the way to 1936. It was America's favorite analgesic. In some places it was outselling aspirin. So all of that had to be reckoned with, and it was a very persistent effort to put the damper on that. The American Medical Association went to court to try to stop the illegalization of cannabis as a medicine. And they said it's ridiculous. The doctors were all in an uproar about it. It works so well. And eventually they overcame all of the resistance to their doing this, and they foisted this repression across the board. And a lot of other drugs were involved in that same process. So now I think that there's so little, it could come back. It's like a cancer. It could come back, that kind of thinking. But now it's Republicans and Democrats alike are saying, this is ridiculous, and starting to, now that applies at least to cannabis. It may not apply when psychedelics grow even more strong in terms of our cultural trajectory, but we'll see. I don't know the answer to that.
I guess my question as much as does it feel different? How did it feel sitting at that point in time versus sitting at this point in time in terms of the socio-political space of substances and the culture?
Did it feel different to?
Did you feel the backlash about to come?
No, because the backlash was for me personally, it was well underway when I was just becoming aware of the world. So I didn't have that sense of it, growing in my face. And what I'm experiencing now is I only dreamed of, and thinking that I'd never live to see this day, let alone what's going to happen 2 years from now or 3. So it's a very different experience, one that I couldn't even imagine. Yeah.
If you could, I guess, pinpoint one thing, what would you say was the principal reason for your ascendance into what you called the Sri Lanka state?
Once again, sorry?
What do you think the principal cause of your ascension into the Sri Lanka state was? You kind of
My ascension.
And also, had you had a psychedelic experience previous to that?
Okay. No, I did not. I had no, my roommates in college were tripping more often than not, but I was not. I was the straight edge guy. You know, I used to party with them because I'm a little bit nuts, I suppose. So I was able to, you know, have fun with them, and at the same time I wasn't using. And so it was a really, I meant it as the Buddhism was the gateway drug. And the other part of your question was?
If you could put your finger on the thing that triggered that state for you.
Okay. So the question is, can I put my finger on the cause, the thing, the impetus that moved me into this really high and rare state? No. And I worked really hard to think about it. I tried to recreate the conditions many times.
And you were starving yourself in a small room?
I did some of that too. Yeah, I went on several pilgrimages to India and back to Sri Lanka too. And I employed fasting, which is a well-known spiritual accelerant. And all I got out of it was fatty liver. So I stopped doing fasts. Yeah, so I really don't know, and I don't know to this day. I mean, you know, in a classical sense, a Buddhist meditation teacher will tell you that, you know, you can go into these jhanic states of high concentration. You can achieve what's called there are 4 levels of achievement, and the initial one is the stream enterer, and that's a powerful experience. I suspect that may be what it was, but I wasn't able to get it again, let alone get to the next level necessarily, at least that I know of. So.
Do you personally believe that's something you could purposefully achieve, or do you feel like it was a gift of sorts?
I want to believe both.
Well, sure.
It definitely was a gift.
Yes.
It definitely was a gift. I wasn't even on my radar. It wasn't even on my wish list. And I wasn't working for it when it happened. So I was resisting it. All I was thinking about is that car coming, you know. So, I mean, I wasn't even focused mentally on finding that peaceful state that was receptive and open and, you know, I was just waiting for the time to go by. But I was sitting, and I was making the effort to follow my breath. So something tells me there's something very simple about that practice, that if you stick with it, you get results. But other than that, it's still a mystery to me. Yeah. Yes, a question back there.
I had a question. You mentioned that you are a part of Rainforest Action Network. You have a kind of a history of doing some anti-war activism. And I was kind of curious about, it seems like sometimes there can be a disconnect between kind of finding inner peace and spirituality and kind of finding these really amazing ideals, and then that disconnect between the sort of political activities on the ground, whether it's kind of the war on Iraq or it's different kinds of militarism, and it's just a very kind of different kind of broader kind of tendency. And sometimes it seems like it's a disconnect or a retreat from the challenges, whether it's ecological or in the political sphere. How do you, it seems like you've done those things and found a way to bring them together. Have you found resistance with people who are less interested in going those directions, or can it be frustrating, or do you see that being an obstacle, or just any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think you're right. Your observation is, I think, mine as well. I share that people get focused on their personal journey, and they want to work on meditating and doing various practices, taking psychedelics, whatever it may be. There are so many, because they want to be happier, or they want to be more peaceful. And somehow out of the equation is left the rest of the world and the natural systems that are in severe decline by the way we live our lives. That just seems so that seems so obvious to me, that if you're becoming more conscious, you've got to be a lot more conscious of that. And when you're more conscious of that, there's got to be something you can do. You've got to think about that. I mean, that's got to come up. So I think I measure, in fact, one's spiritual development to some extent. Personally, I measure the success of that development by how much engagement that might inspire in an individual. What are they doing about the real world they live in? What are they doing to make life better for their children and grandchildren. So being even aware of it is something. And then doing something about it is something else and even more important. But I see a lot less of that than I'd like to. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question. Yes, I have, I guess, time for one more question.
I want to return to the question that the gentleman asked. Do you think that the cause of the Sri Lanka state was acceptance of every single thing around you, of yourself and the situation that you were in? Because I do research in the war zones, and I work with people during war in the Middle East, and I was trying to understand this, and I found that a lot of Sufis, for instance, they pinpoint the acceptance, and pretty much a lot of people with PTSD, the way out from this condition was acceptance, and it seems to me that it was for you, because you kind of accepted the fact that the car will be there, like that's it, and these cockroaches will be there, and so you kind of relax and accept it. So is the key acceptance?
I think it's a big part of it. I mean, it's beautiful the way you put it, because that's exactly what I was doing. I was just surrendering to the situation. There was nothing, I mean, short of just walking down the road and somebody picking me up hitchhiking or something, there was really nothing I could do. And so I just accepted it. I just relaxed into it as best I could. I put up with the pain. I put up with not having the food that I was used to eating. Actually, after about a week, that ceased to be an issue. The greens were great. I mean, they were a little mushy, but they were great. And I was appreciating nourishing my body with the greens, even though it was, it was a far cry from what I was used to. But it didn't take long for me to surrender into it and accept it. And I think that's exactly, if anything, and that was not a conscious strategy. It's just the only thing I thought I could do was just let go. And letting go itself, I think, really was, in answer to your question, maybe part of what prompted the, I don't want to say ascension, but, the progress. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here and asking those questions. Thank you.